I slammed the small box of letters onto the bank desk, and the room went cold. The worn edges of the small box of letters felt heavy in my hands, its burnt scent sharp and accusing. My stepmother's eyes locked onto the box, her mouth opening slightly before she clamped it shut again. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the customer service desk where we sat facing each other like opponents in some silent war. This meeting could decide if Grandma's meager payments keep coming or stop forever. The bank officer, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable. "So, Ms. Rodriguez, you're here to discuss the monthly disbursements to your grandmother's account?" she asked, her voice careful and neutral. "Yes," my stepmother said too quickly. "We need to review the payments. There have been administrative concerns." I leaned forward, keeping my eyes on the box. I'd spent hours last night holding a lighter to the edges of those letters, one by one, watching the corners blacken and curl, not destroying them completely, just marking them, making them impossible to ignore. Each letter was from my father, written to me years ago, letters my stepmother had hidden in her closet, letters I wasn't supposed to find. "Administrative concerns?" I repeated quietly. The words tasted bitter. My stepmother shifted in her seat, her designer purse clicking against the armrest. "Sweetheart, this isn't the time. When is the time?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I chose to hold my ground silently, letting the box speak for me. The bank officer pretended to study her computer screen, but I could feel her attention on us, sharp and aware. "Perhaps we should focus on the disbursement schedule," the officer suggested, tapping her keyboard. "The current arrangement has monthly payments of $847 going directly to your grandmother's account, though I see here the November payment was 3 days late. That's the second delay in 4 months. "That's barely enough to cover her medication," I said, cutting in. "And those delays mean late fees at the pharmacy." My stepmother's jaw tightened. There was a processing delay. "There's always a processing delay," I said. I watched my stepmother's face, waiting for her next move. I caught the whispered words just beyond the cracked door, but they made no sense. Can't keep this up much longer." My stepmother's voice drifted from the kitchen. I'd come home from the bank meeting hours ago, my mind still churning, and found her on the phone. "The account is almost dry. If she keeps asking questions," I pressed myself against the hallway wall, barely breathing. The small box of letters sat unopened on the table, its weight a quiet reminder. Through the gap in the door, I could see my stepmother pacing, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing sharply. "I know what we agreed," she hissed, "but the girl is getting suspicious. She brought those damn letters to the bank today." Made a scene. My heart hammered against my ribs. What account? What agreement? I thought about Grandma in her small room down the hall, her breathing shallow and labored, too weak to walk to the bathroom alone. I thought about the hospital bills stacked on the kitchen counter, marked "Past DU" in red ink. "No, I told you, we can't touch the emergency fund. That's for—" She paused, listening. "I don't care what your brother says, this is family business." I felt more alone, like the truth was slipping through my fingers. Every time I tried to grab hold of something concrete, it dissolved into whispers and half-explanations. The bank officer had asked for documentation today, but my stepmother claimed she'd left the folder at home. When I suggested we reschedule so she could bring it, she'd suddenly remembered an appointment and rushed us out. I shifted my weight, and the floorboard creaked. My stepmother went silent. "I'll call you back," she said quickly, and I heard footsteps approaching the door. I decided to listen more closely, even if it scared me. I slipped away, heart pounding, to find answers no one wanted to give. Pastor Mike's warning was still fresh when things got worse. The pastor's voice dropped to a hiss. "Keep family matters inside, or you're out." We were standing in the church youth room, surrounded by half-empty chairs and motivational posters about faith and fellowship. I had come to youth group hoping for something normal, something that didn't involve bank meetings and whispered phone calls and the constant knot in my stomach. Instead, Pastor Mike had pulled me aside after the worship session, his hand gripping my elbow just a little too tight. "I don't know what you mean," I said, even though I knew exactly what he meant. Word traveled fast in our small church community. Someone had seen me and my stepmother at the bank. Someone had noticed the tension. "Your family's private business," Pastor Mike said, his eyes hard despite his smile. "That's between you and them. And God, of course. But not the whole congregation." I fingered the small box of letters in my bag, a silent rebellion. "The church is supposed to be a place for truth," I said. "Isn't that what you preach every Sunday?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The church is also a place for grace, for keeping unity, for not airing dirty laundry that could damage your stepmother's reputation or yours." He leaned closer, and I caught the scent of coffee on his breath. "You're about to graduate, right? Big plans for the future? Would be a shame if certain opportunities dried up." My place in the youth group felt like it was on the line. More than that, my scholarship application had a letter of recommendation from Pastor Mike. My summer internship at the church's community center, things I'd worked for, things I needed, all suddenly feeling fragile. "I'm not trying to cause problems," I said carefully. "Good," he said, straightening up, "because in Luke 15, Jesus tells us about the prodigal son, about forgiveness and restoration. Sometimes that means letting old hurts stay buried." He patted my shoulder, the gesture meant to be comforting, but feeling like a warning. "Honor thy father and mother, sweetheart, even when it's hard." I wrestled with silence and truth, unsure which path to take. The pastor turned to rejoin the group, already calling out to the other teens about next week's pizza night. I left the room, the pastor's warning echoing in my ears. Grandma's frail hands trembled, but my stepmother just shook her head. "She doesn't need a doctor," my stepmother said, not even looking up from her phone. "It's just the flu. It'll pass." I stood in the doorway of Grandma's room, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow, uneven breaths. Her skin had a gray pallor, and when she'd tried to sit up earlier, she'd collapsed back onto the pillows, too weak to support herself. The small box of letters rested on the shelf, a quiet witness to neglect. "She's been like this for 4 days," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Her fever isn't breaking. She's barely eating. I said she'll be fine." My stepmother finally looked up, her eyes flat. "You want to throw away money on doctors? Fine. Move out and pay for it yourself." The words hit like a slap. I thought about the bank meeting, about the 847 that was supposed to be for Grandma's care, about the whispered phone call and the mysterious account that was almost dry. Grandma's life felt like it was slipping away, and I was powerless. I moved to Grandma's bedside, ignoring my stepmother's heavy sigh. Grandma's eyes fluttered open, cloudy with fever and pain. She tried to smile when she saw me, but it came out as more of a grimace. "Hey, Grandma," I whispered, taking her hand. Her skin felt like paper, thin and fragile. "I'm here. Good girl," she breathed, so quiet I barely heard it. "Always good." My stepmother left the room, her heels clicking down the hallway. I heard the front door open and close. Probably going out with her friends again, to brunch or shopping or whatever she did while Grandma deteriorated in the back bedroom. I vowed to protect her, even if no one else would. Tomorrow was my graduation, the ceremony I'd worked so hard for, the milestone I'd been anticipating for years. But looking at Grandma now, watching her struggle for each breath, I couldn't bring myself to care about caps and gowns and speeches. In my bag, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend. "Ready for tomorrow?" I didn't answer. I sat beside Grandma, holding her hand tightly, refusing to look away. Through the window, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear children playing in the street, their laughter bright and careless. I pulled out my phone again and typed a different message, this one to the church's prayer chain. "Please pray for my grandmother. She's very sick and needs your prayers." Then, before I could second-guess myself, I added, "Also praying for wisdom and courage, for the truth to come to light." I hit send and put the phone away. My stepmother would be furious if she knew. Pastor Mike would probably call me tonight, remind me again about keeping family business private. But sitting here with Grandma's fragile hand in mine, watching her fight for breath while my stepmother dismissed it as just the flu, I knew something had to change. The small box of letters sat on the shelf across the room, its burnt edges catching the fading sunlight. Inside were my father's words I still hadn't fully read, words about love and regret and hope for the future, words my stepmother had hidden from me for years, afraid of what they might reveal. I thought about Matthew 6 verses I'd underlined in my Bible last week during one of my late-night reading sessions. Do not worry about your life, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things, law, be given to you as well. Matthew chapter 6, verse 25-33. I squeezed Grandma's hand tighter, pushing the fear down where it couldn't paralyze me. Grandma's breathing hitched, then settled into a slightly more even rhythm. I squeezed her hand gently, and she squeezed back, just barely, her grip weak but present. I love you, Grandma, I whispered. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't quite hear. I leaned closer. Brave, she breathed. Be brave. I nodded, tears burning behind my eyes. I will, I promised. I will. Outside, the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow I would walk across the stage and receive my diploma. Tomorrow I would smile for photos and hug my teachers and pretend everything was fine. But tonight, in this quiet room with my grandmother fighting for every breath and my stepmother somewhere out in the city avoiding the truth, I made a different kind of vow. I would be brave. I would ask the hard questions. I would protect Grandma, even if it meant standing alone. Even if it meant losing my place in the church youth group, losing Pastor Mike's recommendation, losing the fragile peace that came from keeping silent. The small box of letters seemed to pulse with significance in my peripheral vision, a reminder that some truths couldn't stay hidden forever, that some stories demanded to be told, no matter how much people wanted them buried. I pulled out my Bible from my backpack, the one I'd gotten for my confirmation 3 years ago. The pages fell open to Psalm 27, the passage I'd been reading late at night when sleep wouldn't come. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? I read the words aloud, soft enough not to disturb Grandma, but loud enough to hear myself speak them into the silence. Each verse felt like a small act of defiance against the fear that had been building in my chest for weeks. When I finished, Grandma's eyes were closed again, but her breathing had evened out slightly. Maybe she'd heard the words. Maybe they'd brought her some measure of peace. Or maybe I'd read them for myself, needing the reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. That even when the bank officers looked uncomfortable and the pastors warned me to stay quiet and my stepmother dismissed my concerns with casual cruelty, there was someone who saw the truth. Someone who called me to courage instead of compliance. I settled into the chair beside Grandma's bed, prepared to stay the night if necessary. My phone buzzed again. Another text, probably another friend asking about graduation plans. I silenced it and set it face down on the nightstand. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight I would keep watch. Tonight I would practice being brave. She walked in late, eyes fixed on her own kids, like I was invisible. The auditorium was still buzzing with families congratulating their graduates when my stepmother finally appeared. I'd been watching the entrance for the past 20 minutes, my diploma clutched in one hand, the small box of letters weighing heavy in my backpack, a secret burden. She swept in with her 2 biological children. My half-siblings, dressed like they were attending a wedding, not a high school graduation. Her daughter wore a white sundress that probably cost more than my cap and gown combined. "Congratulations, sweetie," she called out. But she was looking at her daughter, not at me. Her son laughed at something on his phone, barely glancing up. I stood there, in my graduation gown, feeling ridiculous. This day was supposed to be mine, but it felt stolen. Around me, other families clustered together for photos, parents hugging their graduates, grandparents wiping away tears. My best friend Sarah caught my eye from across the room and gave me a sympathetic smile. She knew. Everyone who really knew me knew. Did you get any pictures? I asked, walking over to my stepmother. She blinked, as if just remembering I was there. Oh. Yes, I think so. On my phone somewhere. She didn't pull it out to check. Instead, she turned to her daughter. Honey, you look stunning. We need to get photos before the party. I clenched my fist, deciding not to let her silence me. Not today, not anymore. Grandma wanted to come, I said, my voice louder than necessary, but she couldn't walk that far. Someone would have had to help her. My stepmother's smile tightened. Well, she understands. These things happen. These things happen because you won't take her to the doctor, I said. Her son looked up from his phone now, interested. A few nearby families went quiet, pretending not to listen but obviously tuned in. My stepmother's face went rigid. Shut your mouth or you're out of this house tonight, she hissed. The threat landed like ice in my stomach. But I held my ground. When are we doing it? I asked. Because you keep saying, not now, but it's never the right time, is it? She grabbed my elbow, her nails digging in. The party. We'll talk at the party. Then she smiled again, that fake brightness she wore like armor, and steered me toward the door. I scanned the crowd, hoping for a sign of support. Sarah gave me a small nod. Pastor Mike stood near the refreshment table, watching us with narrowed eyes. The party was supposed to be a celebration. My stepmother had insisted on hosting it at our apartment, inviting church members and distant relatives I barely knew. By the time we arrived, the small living room was already crowded with people holding paper plates and plastic cups, congratulating me with that distant politeness reserved for someone they felt obligated to acknowledge. I caught fragments of a whispered conversation about money that didn't add up. Two of Grandma's friends, women I'd known since I was little, stood near the kitchen doorway, their voices low but urgent. I pretended to adjust the decorations on the wall nearby, straining to hear. Not right, the way the payments keep getting delayed, one of them said. Her name was Mrs. Chin, and she'd brought Grandma soup when she first got sick. I heard there's barely anything left in the account now, the other replied, and the bank said. They noticed me and went silent. Mrs. Chen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Congratulations, sweetheart. We're so proud of you. I nodded, my throat tight. The small box of letters felt heavier in my hands, its silence louder. I'd brought it with me from the auditorium, unable to leave it behind. It felt like the only real thing I owned. Proof that someone had once cared about me, even if they were gone now. Thank you, I managed. Is Grandma okay? I mean, have you seen her recently? Mrs. Chen exchanged a glance with her friend. We tried to visit last week, but... She trailed off, choosing her words carefully. Your stepmother said she was resting, that she couldn't have visitors. For 3 weeks, I said. She's been resting for 3 weeks? The other woman touched my arm gently. We're praying for her. And for you. I wanted to ask more. What they knew, what they'd heard, what the bank had said. But my stepmother appeared at my shoulder, her smile bright and brittle. Ladies, so glad you could make it. Can I get you anything? More punch? They made excuses and drifted away. I resolved to find out more, no matter the cost. The truth felt just out of reach, like a shadow slipping away. I edged closer to where another cluster of relatives stood talking, straining to hear every word. Second account, I heard, someone murmured. Can't prove anything without. But if it's true, that's... They stopped when I approached. All smiles and surface congratulations. But I'd heard enough to know something was deeply wrong. Something beyond the delayed payments and the processing errors my stepmother always mentioned. By then, I'd pieced together enough fragments to know the truth was worse than I'd imagined. Whispers filled the room, eyes darting as secrets hovered just beneath the surface. I stood in the living room doorway, watching the party unfold like a performance I hadn't auditioned for. The small box of letters felt heavier, its silence louder than ever. Grandma's friends clustered in one corner, my stepmother's family in another. Church members picked at the cheap grocery store cake and made small talk that felt increasingly strained. Pastor Mike stood near the window, his arms crossed, watching me with that same hard expression he'd worn in the youth room. He'd given a brief speech earlier, something about God's plans and new beginnings, but it felt hollow, like he was reading from a script he didn't believe. My stepmother's brother, an uncle I barely knew, kept glancing at his phone, then at my stepmother, then back at his phone. His wife looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to leave but didn't know how to suggest it without causing a scene. I knew the moment of truth was coming, and I had to be ready. "Everything okay?" Sarah appeared at my elbow, her voice low. "No," I said honestly, "nothing's okay. What can I do?" I shook my head. There was nothing anyone could do at this point except wait for whatever was going to break. I could feel it building, the pressure, the tension, the weight of all these unspoken accusations and hidden truths pressing down on the room like a storm about to hit. I steeled myself, ready to face whatever came next. The clock on the wall ticked past 7 o'clock. We'd been at this party for almost 2 hours, and now everything was about to break open. Grandma was alone in her room, too weak to join us. My stepmother was playing hostess, smiling and laughing like everything was fine. And somewhere in this apartment, in bank statements and hidden documents and whispered phone calls, was proof of something I couldn't quite name yet, but knew in my bones was true. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath a countdown. Then I heard it, a knock at the front door, firm, deliberate, not the tentative tap of a late party guest. My stepmother froze mid-sentence, her smile faltering. Pastor Mike straightened up. The room went quiet except for the background music someone had put on earlier, some generic worship playlist that now felt absurdly inappropriate. The door opened, and Grandma's friend stepped in, eyes steady and voice clear. I recognized her immediately. Mrs. Rodriguez, not related to my stepmother despite sharing a last name, had been Grandma's closest friend for over 30 years. They'd worked together at the hospital, raised their kids in the same neighborhood, attended the same church before Grandma got too sick to go. I hadn't seen her in months. My stepmother had said she'd moved away, gone to live with family in another state. But here she was, standing in our living room doorway in a navy dress and sensible shoes, carrying a large manila folder under one arm. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Mrs. Rodriguez said, but she didn't sound sorry. She sounded determined. "But I think it's time some things came to light." My stepmother's face went pale. "Maria, this is a private family celebration. If you need to discuss something." "I need to discuss the fact that you've been stealing from your mother-in-law for the past 2 years. The room erupted. Gasps, exclamations, denials. I gripped the small box of letters tightly, its weight grounding me. Everything I thought I knew was about to be challenged. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't flinch. She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. Bank statements, transfer records, documents with official letterheads, and highlighted sections that even from across the room I could tell spelled out something damning. "I have the proof right here," she said, holding up one document. "This shows a transfer of 3 in March alone. The memo line says medical equipment, but there's no medical equipment in this house." She looked directly at my stepmother. "The money went into a separate account. Your account, one that's currently holding over $47,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb. $47,000. While Grandma lay in her room, too weak to stand, too sick for my stepmother to waste money on a doctor's visit. While those 847 monthly payments were always late, always delayed, always barely enough, I felt dizzy. I stood up, holding the box between us, ready to face the storm. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My stepmother's eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, for escape routes. "This is more complicated than—" "Is it true?" I asked again, louder this time. Pastor Mike stepped forward. "Perhaps we should all calm down and discuss this privately." "No," I said. I held the box up like a shield, my voice steady as I spoke the truth aloud. We've been private for too long. That's the problem. Everyone's been protecting secrets and keeping quiet and pretending everything's fine while Grandma suffers. Sarah stepped closer, her hand finding my shoulder. His grace is sufficient for you, she whispered near my ear, her voice steady. His power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. The small box of letters felt like a beacon in the storm swirling around us. I looked at my stepmother directly. You told me we couldn't afford a doctor. You said the account was almost empty. You said we had to be careful with every penny. And you believed her? My stepmother's daughter said, her voice sharp. God, you're so naive. Shut up, my uncle snapped at his niece. This is insane, the girl continued. Mom wouldn't. Your mom has been lying, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice gentle but firm. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but your grandmother deserves better. She deserves the truth. My stepmother finally seemed to find her voice again. You don't understand. That money, it was for emergencies, for the family, for yourself, I said. This moment could shatter or say what was left of my family. For your kids, for your life, while Grandma's life falls apart. I've been taking care of her, my stepmother shouted. I've been here every day, dealing with her decline, managing everything. Managing her money into your own account, I said. I refused to back down, demanding honesty and justice. How long were you planning to keep this going? Until she died? Until there was nothing left? Other people in the room began to shift, choosing sides, the atmosphere splitting like a fault line. My stepmother looked around wildly. You don't know what it's like. The pressure, the responsibility. I gave up everything to take care of her. You gave up nothing, Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. You moved into her home. You've been living rent-free for 3 years, and now we know you've been taking her money too. Pastor Mike tried again. Perhaps we should. Stop protecting her, I said, cutting him off. I looked at him directly. You knew something was wrong. You told me to keep quiet. You told me to keep family matters private. Why? Because it's easier? Because it looks better for the church? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no answer. I turned back to my stepmother, the woman who'd raised me, or tried to, after my father died. The woman who'd always treated me like an obligation, a burden left behind by a marriage she'd never fully wanted to honor. I waited, heart pounding, for her answer. The silence stretched. Through the window, I could hear children playing in the street below, their voices bright and careless, completely unaware of the reckoning happening in this cramped apartment. The party music still played softly, some song about God's faithfulness that now felt cruelly ironic. Well, I asked. My stepmother's face crumpled, not with remorse, not yet, but with the knowledge that her carefully constructed world was collapsing, that there was no way out, no explanation smooth enough to cover this. She looked at me, and for just a moment I saw something that might have been shame, or maybe just fear. Then she turned and walked out of the room. Voices rose and fell, some defending the pastor, others demanding truth. The church meeting had been called for Sunday afternoon, 3 days after my graduation party imploded. Word had spread fast about the money, about my stepmother's secret account, about Mrs. Rodriguez's public accusation. Now the sanctuary felt more like a courtroom than a place of worship. The small box of letters sat on the pew beside me, silent but present. Pastor Mike stood at the front, his face tight with barely controlled frustration. This is a private family matter, he said, his voice carrying across the room. We need to remember that gossip and division are not God's way. Neither is theft, someone called out from the back. I recognized the voice. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen's husband. Neither is letting an elderly woman suffer while someone steals her money. A few people murmured agreement. But others shook their heads, uncomfortable with the confrontation. I could see the congregation splitting right down the middle, some gravitating toward Pastor Mike's call for privacy and peace, others toward the Chen's demand for accountability. "We don't have all the facts," Pastor Mike continued, "and it's not our place to judge. Romans 14 tells us not to pass judgment on one another. Matthew 18 tells us to confront sin in the church," Mrs. Rodriguez said, standing up from her seat near the front. "Especially when it involves the vulnerable, when it involves stealing from a woman too sick to defend herself." My stepmother sat 2 rows behind me, flanked by her 2 children. She hadn't said a word since arriving, just sat there staring at her hands, her face pale and drawn. Part of me felt sorry for her. Most of me felt nothing at all, just a hollow exhaustion. The church's heart was on trial, just like my family's. I could feel people watching me, waiting to see what I would do. Would I stand up and speak? Would I stay silent, like Pastor Mike had originally pressured me to do? I thought about Grandma, still too weak to attend this meeting. I thought about the 47 sitting in an account my stepmother had pretended didn't exist. I thought about all the times I'd been told to keep quiet, to keep family business private, to trust that God would work things out without me having to do anything difficult. I prayed for courage to stand firm in my faith, not the fake faith that looked peaceful on the surface while rot festered underneath. Real faith, the kind that cost something, that demanded truth even when truth was uncomfortable. I stood up. The sanctuary went quiet. "Can I say something?" I asked. Pastor Mike's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure this is the appropriate." "Let her speak," Mr. Chen said. I stepped forward, ready to speak my truth. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steady. My stepmother took money that was meant for my grandmother's care. Mrs. Rodriguez showed us the proof. $47,000 in a secret account. That's not gossip. That's not judgment. That's just what happened. "We're looking into it," Pastor Mike said quickly. "There may be explanations." "She admitted it," I said, cutting him off. I looked directly at my stepmother. "At the party, she said the money was for emergencies, for the family. But Grandma is family, and her medical crisis was an emergency. So where did that money actually go?" My stepmother stood up, her face flushed. "You have no idea what it's like," she said, her voice breaking. "The pressure, the bills, taking care of everyone." "While living in Grandma's house rent-free," I said, "while using her money for your own life." "That's enough," Pastor Mike said, his voice sharp. "This is not productive. We need to handle this with grace, and—" "Grace without truth isn't grace," I said. "It's just enabling." "And I'm done enabling," someone in the back called out. "Easy to judge when you're not the one sacrificing." I turned toward the voice. "Sacrificing what? She's been living in my grandmother's home, eating her food and stealing her money. That's not sacrifice, that's theft." The room erupted again, voices overlapping. Some people stood up to leave. Others moved forward, wanting to be heard. Sarah appeared at my side, her hand finding mine. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded at me from across the aisle, her eyes proud. I sat back down, my heart racing. I'd said what I needed to say. Now it was up to the church and to God to decide what came next. That night, exhausted and emotionally drained, I fell asleep still praying for wisdom. And in my dream, Jesus' eyes held both justice and mercy, calling me forward. We were standing in the church sanctuary, but it was empty now, just the 2 of us. I could feel the worn wood of the pew beneath my hands, even though I knew I was dreaming. The small box of letters rested on my nightstand back in the real world, a quiet reminder, but somehow I could sense its presence even here. Jesus didn't look like the paintings in Sunday school. He looked real. His face was weathered, his hands calloused. When he looked at me, I felt completely seen, every bit of anger, hurt, and confusion laid bare. "You did well today," he said. I sank onto a pew, suddenly exhausted all over again. I was so angry. I still am. He sat beside me, close enough that I could see the kindness in his eyes. Anger at injustice is good. It's what drove me to overturn the tables in the temple. But, I asked, hearing the unspoken word. He smiled slightly. But anger that curdles into bitterness will poison you. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. My hands clenched in my lap. How do I forgive her? She stole from Grandma. She lied to me for years. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen, Jesus said. He gestured toward the empty sanctuary around us. It doesn't mean trusting her again or letting her hurt you. I looked up at him. Then what does it mean? Releasing the debt, giving up your right to revenge. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his posture open and patient. Letting me handle the justice. That sounds impossible. It is, without me. His voice was gentle but firm. But my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. I felt something shift inside me, not my own strength, but something deeper. A gift. What if I fail? I asked. What if I try to forgive and just end up bitter anyway? He stood and I stood with him. Then you get up and try again. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, it's a path you walk. I chose to forgive, but not to forget or enable harm. Standing there in that dream sanctuary, I understood that forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was strength, the kind that came from knowing God would handle what I couldn't. Jesus turned to face me fully. You're going to face more hard conversations, more choices about how to love people who've hurt you. He placed a hand on my shoulder, solid and real. But you won't be alone. I woke determined to walk this new path. Morning light filtered through my window. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Mrs. Rodriguez and a text from Sarah, praying for you. The next 3 days blurred together. Conversations with Mrs. Rodriguez about setting up a proper trust fund, awkward silences with my stepmother, prayers that felt more honest than they'd been in years. I kept waiting for clarity, for some sign that I was doing the right thing. Then the doctor came, and everything shifted again. 3 days later, the doctor's words stunned us. Grandma was improving against all odds. We were gathered in the living room. Me, my stepmother, Mrs. Rodriguez, and the doctor who'd made a house call after I'd finally convinced my stepmother to let Grandma be examined. The small box of letters sat quietly nearby, its story still mostly untold. Her fever broke completely, the doctor said, reviewing his notes. Her vitals are stronger than they've been in months. Whatever infection she was fighting, her body seems to have turned a corner. I stared at him, hardly daring to believe it. Grandma had been so weak just days ago, so close to, I couldn't even finish the thought. How? My stepmother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor shrugged. Sometimes these things just happen. The human body is remarkably resilient. With proper care going forward, medication, follow-up visits, physical therapy, I think she could regain a lot of her strength. Hope flickered in the room, fragile but real. I looked at my stepmother. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. "Thank you," I said to the doctor. "Thank you so much." After he left, the 3 of us sat in silence. Grandma was sleeping in her room, peaceful for the first time in weeks. Mrs. Rodriguez had made tea that no one was drinking. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, making dust motes dance in the air. I embraced the chance for healing and new beginnings, not just for Grandma's body, but for all of us, for the fractured mess our family had become. It wouldn't be easy. There were still so many unresolved issues. The money, the trust, the years of neglect and lies. But maybe, with God's help, we could start to rebuild something real. I reached out to Grandma, tears in my eyes. I stood up and walked to her room, pushing the door open quietly. She was awake, her eyes clear in a way they hadn't been for months. "Hey, Grandma," I whispered. "Sweet girl," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in ages. "Come here." I knelt beside her bed, taking her hand. It felt less fragile now, less like it might crumble at my touch. "The doctor says you're getting better." "God's not done with me yet," she said with a small smile. Still got some living to do. Still got a granddaughter to see graduate from college. I laughed through my tears. You have to get better first. Like, actually better. Doctor's visits and everything. I know, she said. She squeezed my hand. I heard what you did at the party, at the church. Mrs. Rodriguez told me. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry if it made things worse. You stood up for what was right, Grandma said firmly. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. That took courage. I was so scared. Good, she said. Courage doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. That evening, my stepmother finally broke her silence. She looked away, voice trembling as she said, I was wrong. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us. She'd asked to talk privately, and I'd agreed, though Sarah was in my room on standby in case I needed backup. The small box of letters remained closed, a silent witness to our pain, sitting on the counter between us. I was wrong about a lot of things, she continued, not looking at me. About the money, about Grandma's care, about how I treated you. I didn't say anything. I just waited. When your father died, I was so angry, she said. Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at being left with a stepdaughter I never really wanted in the first place. She flinched at her own words. I know how that sounds. It sounds honest, I said quietly. I told myself I was doing my best, that I was taking care of everyone. But really? She finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Really, I was just trying to survive. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that surviving meant taking what I needed, even if it belonged to someone else. She paused, her hands trembling. That first transfer too, for my daughter's college deposit, I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back, but I never did. And then it got easier. One transfer became 2, then 5, then I stopped counting. The first cracks in her armor gave me cautious hope. Not trust, not yet, but hope that maybe, with time and real repentance and actual changed behavior, we might be able to coexist in the same space without constant warfare. What happens to the money? I asked. I'm returning it, she said. All of it. Mrs. Rodriguez is helping me set up a proper trust for Grandma's care, one where I don't have access, where someone independent manages it. Good. And I'm going to start seeing a therapist, she added. A real one. Not just the church counselor who tells me to pray more and submit better. I almost smiled at that. Also good. I can't promise I'll be perfect, she said, or even good necessarily. I've spent so long being this. She gestured vaguely at herself. I don't know how to be different. I chose to forgive, but set firm boundaries for my own heart. You don't have to be perfect, I said. You just have to be honest, and you have to actually take care of Grandma, not just say you're taking care of her while pocketing her money. She nodded, tears spilling over. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I'm so sorry. I took a breath. I forgive you, I said, and as I said it, I felt something shift inside me. Not a complete healing, not a magical erasure of all the hurt, but a loosening, a release. But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was. I'm going to be watching, we're all going to be watching. And if you slip back into old patterns, I know, she said quickly, I know, you have every right not to trust me. I don't, I said, trust you, I mean, but I'm willing to see if that can change. She nodded slowly, ready to start the hard work ahead. We sat there in the kitchen, the evening light fading outside, both of us exhausted and damaged, and just beginning to understand what real healing might cost. Weeks later, on a quiet afternoon, I set the small box of letters on the shelf, its secret still safe inside. The apartment was peaceful. Grandma was napping in her room, actually napping, not unconscious from fever and neglect. My stepmother was at therapy. The house felt different now, not perfect, not even fully healed, but different. The box's worn surface felt familiar, a quiet reminder of all we'd faced. I'd been carrying it everywhere for weeks, this tangible proof that my father had loved me, that someone had wanted me. But now, standing here in the quiet, I realized I didn't need to carry it anymore. I knew what was inside. Mrs. Rodriguez had told me. Letters my father had written while he was sick. Letters meant for me to read when I was older. Letters my stepmother had hidden out of her own pain and jealousy and fear. Maybe someday I'd open them and read every word. Maybe I'd find comfort there, or closure, or some new understanding of who my father had been. But I didn't need to carry it everywhere anymore. I could let it sit on the shelf. A reminder that my father had loved me, yes, but also a reminder of everything I'd survived. The lies, the theft, the years of feeling invisible. And the healing that had come, slow and painful and real. I knew forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. There would be days I'd be angry again. Days. I'd want to bring up the money, the lies, the years of feeling invisible. Days my stepmother would fall back into old patterns, and I'd have to decide whether to call her out or let it slide. Days Grandma would struggle, and I'd wonder if I'd done enough. But there would also be days like today. Quiet days where the sun streamed through the windows and I could hear birds outside, and Grandma was healing and my stepmother was trying, and I was learning what it meant to hold both justice and mercy in my hands without letting either one go. I chose to hold on to hope even when the path was unclear. Hope that God was big enough to handle the mess we'd made. Hope that grace could grow in the cracks of broken things. Hope that forgiveness, real forgiveness, the kind that sets boundaries and tells the truth and refuses to enable harm, could coexist with love. The small box sat on the shelf now, no longer a burden I carried, but a reminder I could look at when I needed to remember I was loved, I was seen, I was worthy of protection and care. And so was Grandma. And so, in some complicated way I was still figuring out, was my stepmother. I turned away, ready to face whatever came next. College applications were waiting on my desk. Grandma needed her afternoon medication. Sarah had texted about getting coffee later. Life was still happening, still moving forward, still demanding that I show up and make choices and figure out how to be the person God was calling me to become. The journey wasn't over. In a lot of ways, it was just beginning. But I wasn't walking it alone, and that made all the difference.